Good morning, my fellow yogic travelers. I'm mighty glad to be alive today, and I hope that you are too. Continuing with my week of acknowledgement of BKS Iyengar's influence in my life. Yoga is all about stilling consciousness, chitta vritti, stopping the mind stuff from just bubbling out, and the intricacies involved in being able to watch your own thought forms, disidentify with your thought forms, and then find out what is the source of consciousness. And one of the great gifts I think that BKS Iyengar gave to the yoga generation that I came alive in was the idea that asana, or the yogic postures, the third limb, is not just a stepping stone to something higher. And even though asana literally means seat, and you could say that you practice postures to keep your spine erect and your body still so you can move on to the supposed higher disciplines of sitting meditation. And as we know, all the big boys and girls sit, so it is leading to being still, being silent to some extent. But really what's happening is he took asana and made you realize all the limbs of yoga could be understood through asana. And many people don't go that deep, which is why they don't follow, and they try to go into the sitting practices. But again, if you don't use asana to help stabilize your body, calm your mind, and bring some kind of emotional equilibrium, then the whole idea of reaching the empyrean heights of yoga, using it as a ladder to climb to other dimensions of perception, probably is not going to happen. So he's a person who showed you how to use asana and the pedagogical device, how to be a great teacher, to move from the concrete to the abstract. I always like to say it's one thing to read yoga philosophy and have conversations that are basically metaphysical speculation. It sounds good, but the truth is, I haven't experienced those states. When you get to the fourth chapter of the Yoga Sutras and it talks about Kaivalya, isolating consciousness after all these different levels of samadhi, they've left me behind. I don't know what they're talking about. And certainly the third chapter, where they're talking about the cities or the accomplishments, almost like the occult powers, it's so esoteric. I don't know anybody who's experiencing that. So my understanding is still limited to the second chapter, which is mostly they're called sadhanapada. It's about practice. And so that's why, although I love talking about that, and symbols are adult toys, we can play with them all we want, but the truth is, I don't know if that's true or not from my personal experience. I sense it is, but in terms of authentically experiencing it, I haven't experienced that. That's why he would say to me, this man, he hasn't gone too far. I accept that. Or this man, he has limited capacity. I accept that. But when it comes to my observational skills, if you hit the mat and I see the way you do the pose, now we can have a cogent conversation about the truth of experience using alignment as the way to show enlightenment. So I'm very, very gifted by that. And of course, he was very, very adamant in talking about people who are fascinated with yoga, but in other words, they're baffling ignoramuses because they're just intellectuals, armchair quarterbacks. They don't have the experience. And all the books, you can see scholars pad the books. They don't necessarily have to have the experience themselves. So he was really fanatic about his own art form and about expanding his knowledge and continuing to evolve his practice over 70 years. And that's what I love about him. And of course, I wanted to model it myself. I don't want to be unfit to teach. And so I keep the practice going. And of course, your life is your practice ultimately, but that's not a reason to abdicate the actual physical practice. And so there may be stories and interpretations and quarrels, like the blind men and the elephant, just in case you forgot that. These blind men heard an elephant were coming to their town, so they all wanted to find out what the elephant was like. So one touched the leg and thought it was a pillar. One touched the trunk and thought it was a wall. One touched the tail and thought it was a fly whisk. One touched the ear and thought it was a winnowing fan. One touched the tusk and thought it was a spear. One touched the tail and thought it was like a hissing serpent. So each one was varied, right? Each interpretation was varied according to the limited light that each one of them had. So in the same way, you learn to reserve your own opinion about what your ego thinks is going on, which is a limited version of reality, until you can let it go and see from a more expanded perspective. And that's where you're supposed to find the oneness, the core of being within yourself. And of course, when you realize that, you realize that everybody else is a spark of the divine, a chip off the old block, so to speak. and that you are one with them and one with nature and one with the maker of everything, the creator. Now when you get to this, it becomes confusing because they have so many different words that I learned from Mr. Iyengar that apparently point to the same thing. And if you're going to have jnana, which is knowledge, and bhakti, the devotion that comes from consecrated action, and then you're going to have karma, which is the way you present it in the world, that's Kriya Yoga. That's the definition. Tapaswadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhana. Do your practice with a certain kind of zest and austerity, and then study what you're doing so you know why you're doing it, go deeper into it, plumb the depths of the Holy Writ and what the Masters have to say, and then offer the results to the Divine. And then you might have any of these different phrases, which I'll just say them because it's so wild, right? Manolaya, the passive mind, right? Tattva, the truth. Shunyavashta, the empty state of void. Amanas Kattva, the supreme state of stillness. Advaita, non-dualism. Nirlamba, supportless samadhi. Niranjana, pure samadhi. Jivan Mukti, free while alive. Sahajavashta, the natural intuitive state. And Turya, the cataleptic state of trance. Unbelievable different ways saying the same thing. They're all knowledge of the self. But knowledge of the self, as he would say, doesn't mean or doesn't impart to you negligence and careless of the body or of your relationships with other people or your time in the world. Even if you practice like a mad person, the idea is not to be a recluse. He was a householder his whole life, and it reminded me the whole time that I was running a business, raising my kids, that I still was doing my spiritual practices to the hilt. And so you can always say, there's more to observe. I can always improve the quality of my own virtue, try to be a better human being, do as much good as I can to as many as I can for as long as I can. And then in some way you're following the Master's legacy. And as he always would say, perfection is perfecting. So keep your practice going. And sign up for my Mexico vacation. The end of February, early March. It's 25th year. It'll be a good thing to share.